We are taking another look at U.S. President Donald Trump's latest 50% tariff threat on Canadian exports, from wine to hockey sticks to even candles. It is a response to provinces banning alcohol, Canada's actions in the auto sector, and protections in the dairy industry. McGill PhD candidate Diya Jiang specializes in international trade with a focus on U.S.-Canada economic relations. So good to have you with us. Now, we heard for some Quebec wine producers who are not too worried because they are selling locally or to other markets. Just wondering how this latest tariff threat compares to what Quebec has been experiencing already.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that Quebec has already been experiencing very high tariffs, specifically aluminum and steel tariff that has hit the industry pretty tough. In terms of this tariff, we're seeing a very large number, which is 50% on, a list of a number of products that includes Canadian wine. However, I like to kind of establish that American exports in terms of alcohol to Canada, it is much, much, much higher than the percentage of Canadian alcohol that's going down south. That is perhaps why a lot of wine producers, Quebec alcohol producers are not as worried, because they are facing a local market and they're facing a Canadian market rather than completely being dependent on the U.S.
But obviously the dairy industry is worried.
Yes. So I think it's very obvious from this tariff announcement that, dairy quota is one of the point of negotiation, point of discussion that the United States very much care about.
Okay.
And that will be a high talking point. And having 50% tariff on that would quite severely, target this industry. However, I would also still want to establish that Canadian dairy is also facing the Canadian market, and is largely, supplying Canadians, and the competition is there.
And even Christine Frechette said that issue, supply management, non-negotiable. I'm just wondering, how do you think Quebec has managed this trade war so far with this Trump administration?
So I think it's difficult to manage this trade war, not just for Quebec, for Canada as a whole, and for many other countries that are currently facing tariff. Quebec has historically a very well-established effort internationally, especially to the United States. We have a lot of international offices down south, and the premier also did her first official visit to the United States. So there's a limit to which Quebec can really do. However, I do think some of the alcohol bans that are coming from the province is kind of causing more tension, and Quebec has been disproportionately hurt by all the tariff coming in. And that's not necessarily the fault of the government, but it's just the way the sectors are distributed across Canada.
I'm just wondering, with the Trump administration, Donald Trump not that popular, but we're hearing that he's pretending, posing to be strong with this to appease his MAGA base, but then you've got midterm elections coming up. What kind of scenarios do you see playing out before the midterm elections, or even over the next 28 days so far?
Right. Yeah, I think midterm elections is definitely a key turning point. I believe, not only Americans, a lot of Canadians are closely watching. Why does it matter? Well, we are facing kind of CUSMA renegotiation. Currently, CUSMA is still in effect. But if U.S. were to end CUSMA, that needs congressional approval. That's where kind of midterm results really comes in. Having kind of the balance of Democrats and Republicans coming in, and that could really decide the fate of CUSMA. So that's why, on the other hand, in the short term, there's a lot of inflationary pressure that's currently facing the United States, and that could change the midterm outcome. So this tariff war could also harm Americans as we speak.
Okay, and then we'd have to see what actually happens in 28 days and after that, and whether this actually goes through. Diya Jiang, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to help.